Welcome to Top Shelf Word Salad, where Ben and Jason talk about books, music, movies, and media of all sorts. Yeah. Okay, so this time on Top Shelf Word Salad, after a brief pause for the holidays and various events and tragedies and what have you, we are checking out both Scale and Freewill.
Two books instead of one.
Right? Just for the amount of time it's been.
Yeah. I think Freewill was the one that we wanted to read, but it's so short. It took like 2 hours in one sitting, so it was
yeah. And but that's the one that's the most contentious in a way, so I think would kind of get the most interest as well.
Yeah.
So and does for me. Scale is wonderful, but we were just talking about how it's a bit bloated.
Yeah. It's thick. It's funny because the Freewill book is so short and Scale is just ginormous. So
it is. It really is.
It is. It's got a lot of filler in it, but the guy's a good writer. He's a good storyteller. He's a scientist who can really communicate the science in an easy to understand way. And I think he lands on a couple of pretty interesting things. So it's not that it's not worth it. It's just that it takes maybe longer than it should to get through.
Yeah, it could be condensed. It really could. I wasn't really sure why it was as long as it was at times, because he kind of delves into some things that obviously are tangential.
There's a great one at the beginning when he's talking about scaling doses of medicine, and he tells the story of the scientist giving LSD to the elephant.
Yes.
And just killing it.
God, like so fast.
Yeah.
Like that elephant just, tripped harder than Aldous Huxley did on his way out, because he had an IV of LSD when he was dying.
Yeah.
Huxley
I didn't know that.
He actually did. Yeah. His wife was there with. I just can't even imagine. Oh. Like that's going out with just balls of steel.
It really is. I hadn't heard that. That's nuts.
Yeah. But he and the elephant kind of had parallel journeys.
I think the way he described it, I think the elephant got it too fast to know what was going on.
Yeah, I think you're
right. They overdid the dose by like 200 times or 1,000, 1,000 times the maximum.
Right.
Just dropped it.
Yeah, it was a logarithmic oops.
So that's an early total tangent that he goes on. And it's early in the book, and I'm like, I'm going to love this book because the story's so great. And there are other things like that. But it was one of the good side notes.
It's fascinating in a way that people at different times in history have picked on the poor elephants. Edison fried an elephant to show that alternating current was an evil to outdo Tesla.
I didn't know that either.
So what are we gonna do? Well, let's electrocute an elephant. And what? To show the DC is safer, as if Anyway.
Wow.
But I guess it's just pick a huge mammal. Getting a blue whale would be a pain in the ass. You'd need way too much LSD.
Yeah, right. There's not enough. Well, I feel bad for the poor mice. All of the experiments we've done on legions of mice.
Legions.
I have this idea for a story where the mice somehow try to get revenge on humans. Like they band together and maybe they develop their intelligence based on some of the testing we're doing to them, and they find a way to overthrow us and make our lives hell for all of the torture that we placed upon them.
Like suburban mazes. Maybe like the suburbs could be the mice's idea.
Oh yeah. The cul-de-sacs.
Right. If we name it a French name, they'll go for it.
Yep.
It was in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where he talked about how mice were actually the three-dimensional extensions of four-dimensional beings that were controlling everything.
Oh yeah. So I do remember that.
Yeah. I love those books.
I do too. I couldn't get the kids to couldn't get the kids to get
Oh,
into
really?
it too
Oh.
much. No.
I remember. Do you remember how to fly? Throw yourself at the ground and miss.
Yeah, that's right. He's in that tree all day trying to throw himself down.
Right. But he accidentally does it on a planet like it's on a. I think he was escaping a mountain that's about to explode because that being that he continually killed by mistake again.
Yeah.
Reincarnation after reincarnation had finally caught him. Anyway, talk about tangential.
Yeah. Who am I to complain?
Right. But a lot of West's observations of just, I mean, unsurprisingly scaling are incredibly profound, really, for like emergent properties at different levels of scale.
Yeah. And he started writing the book. He's a physicist, scientist, and he started writing it just because he had kind of happened on some patterns associated with life in general everywhere, especially across mammals. And I think he started to investigate, and he was surprised that there wasn't more of what he considered to be a scientific discipline around biology and life. So it's that classic like mathematics versus social sciences on two extremes, but it's biology and physics are conducted in very different ways.
Yeah.
And so he goes out on a hunt to try to make more systematic these maybe some laws of biology and laws of life. And he does, in certain places, actually get to some really interesting things.
He really does. The fact that a blue whale and a mouse have around the same average heartbeats in their lifetime. I mean, that's incredible.
It is, and it's across all of mammals. Like it's 1.5 billion heartbeats on average, right?
Yeah, assuming you don't pump it full of LSD really fast.
Yes. Oh my god!
I can't not come back to the elephant.
I'll have to remember his name. It's going to come to me. Tunga or something.
Something.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's the heartbeats thing is one of them. But there are a whole bunch of them. Basically, he was going through a litany, and it seemed to be anything related to the biological processes of life. And a lot of them aren't just confined to the taxonomic group. It's not just that certain laws apply only to mammals. It actually, a lot of these things, like metabolism rates, extend across all life forms, which is kind of mind blowing as well.
It is. It really is. Yeah,
so,
it's. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so when he's setting up the book, he teases very well at the beginning what I think is one of the most interesting things, which is the growth rates associated with many different processes being adhering to quarter power exponent laws. Am I saying that right? Yeah, quarter power law. So something to the fourth power or the 3/4 power is what makes, or is how we measure things in common across different life forms. So he says that up front, like the reason that we see the same number of heartbeats is because it's that process scales. The process of a beating heart scales to the size of the animal, and therefore...
And it's just a straight line on a graph. From left to right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
I could put in a bunch of the graphs, if we want.
And I was trying to guess, because like I said, he teased it at the beginning and didn't get to it until a few chapters in. But I was trying to guess what the significance of the number 4 might be, and I was thinking leading up to it that it might have something to do with carbon, right? So with the chemical basis for all of life, because I think he's seeing commonalities, and I'm thinking that the one commonality is that it's these things that are made up of these organic materials, like the proteins and the lipids, and so I was thinking that maybe it was had something to do with the relevance of the carbon atom as the basis of a lot of these structures in life. But it turned out not to be.
Yeah,
that wasn't it at all.
That's a really interesting idea, though. Yeah. I mean, whether it is or not, but But yeah, go ahead and continue with what it actually turns out to be then.
So what he's saying is that as things scale and grow, they grow in 3 dimensions, right? So, and if we think about building houses or artifacts or anything like that, if we make something twice as big, we understand the impact to the area and the volume of that, and it has this relationship that's based in 3 dimensions. Mm-hmm. But what West is saying is that the way that life has evolved, it's evolved networks that conduct the business of life. So your blanking on like the system. So vasculature, right, would be a network that carries blood, and so on and so forth. But what evolution has done over the millennia has kind of optimized these networks so that they're space filling and that they service all ends, all terminal units are serviced by the same network. So in other words,
the capillaries example.
Yeah, the capillaries would be the terminal units, and those are constant, relatively constant across life. So that basically he's saying that the optimization of the network, being space filling and servicing all the terminal ends, creates a 4th dimension in addition to the volume, so that as creatures grow in size and therefore volume, their networks also grow in a way that makes the network efficient on a 4th dimension. So,
which is that scaling dimension, basically. Right?
Yeah, and so that's where the quarter power comes from, because as volume doubles, then something will either grow 3/4 as fast, or 1 1/4 times as fast, or in some proportion relative to that, because of how the networks are designed.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that a lot of the networks begin with very similar, even like the diameter of the aorta and coming out of the heart. He used the tree as an example. The diameter of I don't know what the name of it is in the tree, but what would be the aorta, I guess.
Yeah.
Like the main kind of starting point of its vasculature is very similar.
Yeah, right. And that's where it's not just mammals. It's trees. It's anything that's alive, really.
Yeah.
And so he goes sideways. Like he does get lost in tangents, but I think when he talked about fractals, so the science behind why this network becomes a 4th dimension is because of its fractality, which is like it's just the way that it's structured, mathematically a little chaotic, right?
But self-similar,
squiggly. That's something that nature throws out everywhere, but fractals are not a super easy concept to understand. I thought he explained them extremely well.
I did too. The coastline thing.
The coastlines.
Yeah. That always works perfectly, I think, because how long is the coastline? I mean, that was Mandelbrot's paper, I think, wasn't it? Or he based it off of. Yeah, I think that was in the title. Just, I think it was in England, or that he used it as an example. Anyway, that how long is the coast of England, and the more you zoom in, the longer it gets.
Right. So, and I don't know that I even understood that concept very well, but I think after reading this book, he gave a couple of examples, and it's like, oh, okay, I get that. That makes sense. The more you zoom in on a coastline, the more you have littler and littler pieces that you're measuring, and so they're going to add up to larger numbers.
Yep.
They'll converge on something, but it's not convergence like when you just measure the width of a room or something.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the limit in calculus, getting closer, from both sides. I mean, you end up with finer and finer detail and more decimal numbers as you get close. Yeah. The first time I was ever exposed to fractals, this is unbelievably ironic and funny, I think, to some extent, is the first time I went to a Grateful Dead concert, and a guy had a TV that he had hooked up to a small generator, and had this. This was 1987. I was 15, and he had this screen with the fractal imagery with the self-similarity, and you can go in and go in and go in and go fractal zoom kind of thing, and I was in the right state of mind to see it. Let's say that. Okay. And it was it was mesmerizing. For that, I'd never heard of the concept or seen. It was completely foreign to me, and that self-similarity just seemed to have some type of deep truth to it. but
Yeah.
in some really abstract and weird way. That this book, in some ways, especially in the fractal section, tackles pretty well.
Yeah. I think made it pretty clear.
Yeah.
You're right. At that time, there was a space of like 5 or 10 years when chaos theory and fractals were like it was almost part of the underground art scene.
It was, that it was when we were in college. The James Gleek book, wasn't his name Gleek? Yeah.
Who's written a couple of other. Talk about a side note. Some really interesting books. I read one by him on time travel.
Oh,
he does
wow!
Like a history of like
I didn't know that
time travel, and it's really.
I think he wrote a book about Feynman too. Called
Did he?
Genius.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
I could look that up really fast. I must know, but I didn't read it, but I'd like to. A lot of times for me, reading biographies kind of on the back burner. Yeah, it was about Feynman. Genius, it's called.
Genius. Yeah.
I mean, if anybody fits the bill, Feynman gets it.
Yeah. It's one of the greats.
Really, truly. I still can't believe he taught himself calculus as a kid in the summer at the library. What?
Didn't know that.
I still struggle with it. I hate him.
In the summer, and he was just bored, probably.
Right.
He was like, what am I going to learn about today?
Right. I should probably do this.
Scale. What else about scale? So that, to me, that was the big deal was the quarter power scaling laws.
Yeah. Same with me. That was one thing I was a little bit worried about in terms of talking about this book, because I didn't just want to make it a series of cited examples.
Right.
So a lot of the concepts are, basic enough that you can discuss it briefly, and then there's 50 different ways that he lays it out as an argument that all are saying the same general foundational concept. But it's still completely worth reading for anybody out there.
I agree. And so once he gets to that kind of main law of scaling, and he has a lot of examples to support it.
In nature.
He does also, he'll move from nature, the natural world, and then he moves into cities. And talking about the networks within cities that actually therefore make cities generate economies of scale and other things like that, in the way that life does. Maybe not as efficient a way, but it's interesting that he's taking these things he's learned from the scaling of life forms and seeing the parallels when it comes to cities, growth and sizing of cities,
and cities' productivity, also scaling upward in terms of people, the amount of people. Like I think he used Oklahoma City as an example, and then compared that to either maybe it was Los Angeles.
Los Angeles,
yeah. And just saying, if you just scale up the productivity of Oklahoma City is X, then the productivity of Los Angeles is not just X multiplied by the increase in size. It's related to that power law.
That's right. So two examples. The example that you're speaking of would be like average income. So in Oklahoma City, the per capita income is X, and in Los Angeles, which is some multiple in size, it's the per capita median income is larger than you would expect for something that's just scaled up to Los Angeles size. So that's a super linear relationship between income and a whole bunch of other things, in productivity measures. And then the example on the other end is that as the city scales up to Los Angeles size, the number of gas stations, for example, will not grow quite as fast, because a single gas station will be able to service a greater population in the scaled up city. So that's a sublinear
that's a great example.
Relationship in the growth. And
then there's the entrepreneurial output, which completely exponentially goes up.
Which is, so what was,
I thought Los Angeles wasn't the greatest example for that, because Hollywood's there and it's just this mecca. But really the same with New York or Chicago. What the city's output will be in terms of new inventions and different patents. He used patents as an example. That completely takes off with more people.
and I was listening to it. I wasn't reading the book, so I didn't look at the charts. I know there's a lot of charts in there and I could kind of follow what he was saying, but I did want to look more deeply into the city's scaling charts, because he seems to find this relationship that's very solid. That's where the scaling is at a factor of 0.15 or 0.8, 1.15 or 0.85.
Right. Yeah.
So as opposed to the quarter power scaling laws, this would be like, smaller than that, a sixth power kind of thing, because the networks aren't as efficient. But I really find it hard to believe that the relationships are that solid. Like I feel like there have to be outliers if you're talking about a number of cities. There can't be that many that he was able to investigate. But but he feels good enough about it to draw the trend line out. So.
Well, and you can't really compare the creative output of, say, Houston to the creative output of Los Angeles, since a large portion of Los Angeles' economy is based on, if you want to call Hollywood creative anymore, creative output. Or New York, if you wanted to compare Houston to New York's art scene. There are things that are specific to each, zone or city. Same with, probably even historical museums or something. Like in London, you can find some really, really cool. I was at the British Library, and they have hand-written, in box hand notation. The Magna Carta's there. There's just it's like, and there's the Royal Libraries in the center of the place. Right above, it's kind of just funny. There's a little coffee shop, and it just seems mundane, amazing, mundane. But
you're right, though. So the historical treasures, probably any large European city would
probably be better.
Much more.
Yeah. Well, if just for the case, everything's so much older. Like that pub I was telling you about in Edinburgh when I was there. It had opened in 1516. I mean, what?
I love that kind of stuff.
People have been drinking there for 505 years.
Unbelievable.
One thing that I did find a little disappointing in terms of, I thought he would go into it, was a little better description of the science of complexity, and even just combinatorics or something on some basic level, talking, and I don't know. What did you think?
I agree with that 100%, because we had read Freewill first, and then we were reading this, and I was hoping it was going to get to a place where he started to talk about life or consciousness as like an emergent, an emergence of a behavior or a quality of a complex system. And he was right there when he was talking about, the assemblage of life from the cellular level up to us, and that it's complex, and the science of complexity, if we had one, would help us to understand it. And to me, that would be a perfect place to start talking about consciousness as this emergent property of this complex behavior. But it didn't.
It would have been a perfect thread from the Neumann book in a way, and that's why really I thought of pairing these two together to begin with, because they almost get there in a way. But a big part of my argument against Harris's free will book is based on that idea. So, but it touches on it a little, I guess.
It does. It gets there, and it gets there in an interesting way. It's not like a failure on his part. It wasn't really in his scope. And again, the book's good, but there are little places where I wish he'd done more.
Me too.
I was worried at first because he he talks about the scale of life, then he talks about the scale of cities, and then the last part is he's talking about the scale of businesses. And he mentioned early on that's how this was going to be structured, and I thought, oh boy, here comes another business book. This is something that's been written to sell to CEOs, like that he's gonna like set up all the science, and at the end he's just going to basically say, here's how you can make the most money in your business.
And that's why he put it.
Yeah, but he didn't do it though. I was like rolling my eyes when he set it up. But really, I think he legitimately got a hold of a lot of public data, market information, and just analyzed it in the way he had done with the other networks and the other scaling. So it actually was pretty interesting.
I thought too, when he related the cities and biology to businesses, and talked about why do biological systems and business systems die and cities don't. That's pretty interesting.
And and here's my thought. I think cities do die. Mm-hmm. I think they don't yet because they're so new. So if you think about like the human growth cycle, it's you grow, and then you stop, and then you die, right? I think when it comes to cities, urban infrastructure, it's so very new in the big picture that it hasn't hit its static level yet. Once you have filled cities with just about everybody, right? Everything's become urbanized, and it looks like we're going that way. You're going to start to run out of additional people, or additional people to create these scales, these economies of scale, or these larger impacts. So I'm thinking in terms of thousands of years down the road, I think you will start to see these things die in the same way that other network-based things die.
Yeah, that was a quote I remember from the book. He was talking about the only people who think anything can grow exponentially forever are lunatics and economists.
Right. And it's hard to argue with that, right? That just makes sense. Like you can't, of course, it can't grow forever. But then again, we said the same thing 150 years ago about about just populations growing out of control and not having enough resource to keep up with it, and we've figured out ways to scale with it. So it's
I remember an old argument against AI that was about what did they call it, like the gray sludge or something, that there was potential that the planet one day would be nothing but this gray sludge. And the reason was self-replicating nanobot technology. So you end up with, untold quadrillions of these things covering the planet that it chokes out all life.
It's not like a big soupy residue over the whole surface of the Earth. Oh.
Yeah, undulating nanobots everywhere. Whatever.
Talk about a dystopian future. That sounds like a movie waiting to be made.
Yeah. There was actually a Star Trek episode about nanites.
Really?
The next generation. Yeah. They have to make peace with them because they're tearing apart the ship.
The nanites. Pretty good show. The Next Generation especially. I didn't love the first Star Trek, but I liked the Next Generation.
First Star Trek had some okay moments, but yeah, the Next Generation was the best for me.
All right, what else about this book? I made some notes, and of course they're on my phone, which is right there, so I can't access them. That was smart.
Well, he goes into the whole idea of science of sustainability at the end. I think that's what he calls it. Let me see. Yeah, a grand unified theory of sustainability. I don't think. I mean, he relates it to the relative growth of New York and some other stuff, but I didn't feel like he really laid out a good enough. Obviously, I wasn't expecting him to. Here's the blueprint. That's all we got to do. Let's go. Yeah. But it seemed a little vague to me. But
that's a funny take because mine is similar, but maybe on the opposite end. I was worried it was going to go on for too long, and it was going to be this series of possible things that we could do to get ahead of global warming and environmental change. And I thought it was merciful that he was pretty short on it, because I feel like when you write a book like this, you have to, and you set it up the way you have to end it with this, what's going to come next. But I was actually glad that he didn't go too far down.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I see that too. It definitely Well, my first complaint about the book was that it's too bloated. You know, but then I'm bitching about the end not being
That's
bloated
right.
enough.
You got used to it by the end. You're like, I want more bloat.
Right, bring the bloat.
Yeah. Oh, there is. So here's something that I found really interesting when he was talking about global warming. He was talking about as the environment elevates in temperature by a couple of degrees or a certain percentage, that chemical and physical, well, chemical processes move faster, right? So all the reactions in your body associated with you being alive, and therefore your lifespan, go faster. So one of the impacts of global warming presumably is that lifespans on average will shrink to a certain extent based on how warm the average temperatures get. And I had never heard that. It makes sense, and I think it's the kind of argument that I think regular people would pause at and think about, the situation a little more intensively. Because when you just talk about cities on coastlines and the elevated sea levels, I think people don't really care that much. Like in a typical person's mind, you'd say, well, I guess you're gonna move out of Miami and inland somewhere, pick another spot, and that's kind of the solution. But when as focused as we are on making our lives longer and being healthy, like I think almost everybody would say, oh, shoot, that means my life's going to be 10% shorter because of 2 degrees more.
Whether you're in Nebraska or the Maldives or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. One thing I don't remember if he addressed this, but it just popped into my mind as you were talking about it, is one way that things got larger when it was warmer. How do I say this? When the planet was warmer, animals tended to grow larger. That's the megafauna period.
Yeah.
So I wonder. I have no idea what the average lifespan of megafauna was. Maybe it was 7 years or something.
I bet you could predict it, though, based on this book, like based on the scaling.
Yeah.
If you had an idea what the size was, and you had an idea that they were probably put together with the same kind of networks we are, you'd probably make a guess at it.
Another thing I've always, I don't remember if you wanted this, or I didn't see it, or I don't know, was the relative acidity in the body, given a certain amount of carbon dioxide. Because when carbon dioxide is what brings about the breathing need in the body. It's not to breathe in oxygen, it's to blow off carbon dioxide.
Right.
So if you, I don't remember if I brought this guy up before, but there's the guy Wim Hof. I think, did I mention him to you?
No.
So he has a whole breathing technique that's really interesting, and it does work. I've done it. It's basically a controlled hyperventilation. And as you breathe in deeply and out quickly, you eventually blow off quite a bit of the carbon dioxide in your body. Your body gets a little more alkaline, and you can pause at the end of it and not feel a need to breathe for like 2 to 3 minutes.
Wow.
Which it is kind of a small eternity when you're used to breathing every 20, 30 seconds or having that need constantly.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly relaxing, and it's almost like you turn your body into a momentary sensory deprivation tank. And it's relaxing, and one other thing that happens is if you do a bunch of push-ups before you do this breathing exercise, if you immediately, instead of doing the just laying there and not breathing thing, go and do push-ups again, you will do more and not get tired, because the lactic acid in your body doesn't build up as fast because you're not as acidic. Yeah. Anyway, my idea here is just that if there's a lot more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, I would think you would have a higher level of carbon dioxide in your body.
You'd breathe faster.
You'd breathe faster, your heartbeat would go faster, and you would hit your heartbeat threshold more quickly. Right. So your life would be shorter.
That's it. Yeah, another way to make it more immediate.
Yeah. But growing larger in size is, I don't know, whatever with that. But I know a bunch of 30-foot tall people that live 8 years.
Yeah. That was another part of the book where he went into the physiology of Godzilla. So
Oh,
he had been asked by some reporter, like,
that's right.
So I listened to
Oh, it was
a
somebody
couple
in
of times
Hollywood,
through.
wasn't
Yeah, and I just, by the end of it, I'm like, okay, this is fine. I don't need this part of the book.
it? Right, right. Yeah. It was. He was. I think he was trying to be entertaining with
Yeah.
it and funny, and it just. I don't know. Maybe he was just detailing it too much.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, something else that I just thought of too. So when he talks about the constant number of heart rates across mammals, right? One big important thing to note is that humans are no longer on that scale. So because of what's happened in the way that we're consuming energy and we're attacking diseases, and our lifespans have doubled in the last like 200 to 250 years,
Yeah.
we now get a billion more heartbeats than would be expected. So we have already sort of engineered our way to be more efficient over just
You're
over
not
the
gonna believe
last
what's
couple
happening.
of years, which is
Yeah. Hopefully it stops. This is. Yeah, right.
is it freezing up again?
Oh,
Oh. Are you back up?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. With free will. What did you think overall?
I hated it. I did not like this book at all.
Yeah.
I read it twice too, and I really wanted to like it because so first of all, I've always thought the question of whether or not we have free will is a dumb question. Like I've never really understood why people are so obsessed with it, because to me it's like because to me it's a matter of faith and belief. There's no logical way to get to the heart of the matter. So either we have
Yes.
free will, in which case check, move on, or we don't, but we then therefore have the illusion of having free will, which is the same thing,
move on.
right? So
Mhm.
so that's been I've come across the question a lot. I've never really cared very much, but when pressed, my basic stance is that we don't have free will, that we're operating in a system that's all predefined, that's ultimately, I believe in a higher intelligence and a God figure. And so if you accept notions of omnipotence and omnipresence, then I think you can't get out of that predestination world. And these are all beliefs I probably formed when I was very young, but I have, and I also like it because it's the counter argument. I like to take up the counter argument too and say, well, any example you can come up with, I can turn that into a predestination, we don't have free will argument. So with that background, I really wanted to like this book. This is the position he takes, and
It is.
and I don't think he did a very good job of laying any argument out at all. I think I'll say to me, this book is about one experimental result. The whole thing is about one observation. Can you explain it? I'll try. I would try, but I get confused by it. But can you explain the experiment?
Basically, they honed in on the area of the brain that would more or less light up as this person made a specific choice of left hand, right hand. Right. And they could, I forget the exact amount of time, but it was. He claimed it was up to 7 seconds, but I don't think it was that. And when you go in to look at those actual papers, there are caveats all over the place that they throw in,
right,
that he never mentions, which is really curious.
Yeah, that's not cool.
So it's just somebody, choose your right hand or left hand to react to something, and I forget what the input was of the experiment. Do you remember?
That's where I get confused. I know that the idea was I'm going to decide to move my hand left. And they're going to measure, my brain to see what's active when. And I don't know exactly how they get the result, but the result is they see the activity associated with moving the hand left milliseconds before the person is actually aware that the decision is made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm fuzzy on the details of the experiment, but that's what he presents at the beginning. And so from there, I think the singular argument he makes is, well, that means that you're doing something that you're not in control of. Something else is in control of it. Therefore, you don't have free will.
Yeah, and I find that really interesting in terms of it. Like, it's kind of in a way, failure of an argument. It was from his podcast. He was talking about what it's like when you meditate and you kind of pull back from your thoughts and you reach this state where your thoughts just move by like clouds and you have no connection to them or interest in them, but they're still there and you can watch them arise and float by. Mm-hmm. Well, that still means that you're consciously set apart, from your conscious mind to some degree. If you want to call that like a meta-conscious or something, or you're, kind of resting on some type of subconscious plateau watching the conscious work, where you're normally involved in the conscious with the subconscious influencing you. That's fine, but it does divide things into separate realms, as if they're very clearly delineated. So in the experiment, the way he talks about the experiment, your subconscious mind is causing your conscious mind to make an action, and that subconscious is activated a small amount of time before your conscious reacts. Therefore, you're not in charge of your conscious actions. But there's I would say that divide is unfathomably porous, and you can't. I mean, what's influencing what? How many conscious actions have brought about a learned response in the subconscious that then teaches the conscious to, back and forth kind of learning over time, so that on unbelievably small and insignificant actions, like moving your hand, maybe your subconscious has developed a routine that is to some extent predictable. But when you get into much more complicated scenarios, like having a conversation, to what extent are you then in charge of that conversation consciously? It might be quite a bit higher. And trying to figure out what somebody's going to say before they say it is obviously something that's currently impossible.
Right.
So, I mean, it really starts to break down the moment you get into any type of more complex situation.
Yeah, or even a simple situation. I think you put that very well. I think the argument, the argument is dividing conscious and subconscious. And the bottom line is, when you think about your consciousness, it's like, how are you defining it? Are you willing to say what is unconscious is not part of your thought process?
Right.
Of course, it has to be. I think we all understand that intuitively. And then there was there's a guy that he brought up, Dennett, I think was his name.
Yeah.
And he quotes Dennett's kind of thoughts on the subject, and I thought Dennett was super clear. Like when I read the argument, I'm like, why did you just quote this argument? You just like totally, you totally took your own argument apart by putting it in there.
Right. Yeah. And Dennett put out a book I read some of in college called Consciousness Explained, which is pretty brazen. But
Nice.
he and Douglas Hofstadter, I forget if they wrote the book together. It's been a long time since I read it. It's called The Mind's Eye, not the.
Oh, right. You told me that he was the guy that. Yeah.
Yeah. That was when we were living together in college.
Yeah.
And then I got to have a couple classes with Hofstadter. Who was, I don't know, interesting guy, definitely. And then, Hofstadter's entire thing is that consciousness arises out of what he calls like the strange loop. He even dedicated a book to it.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah. And in Gödel, Escher, Bach, that's when he kind of started the trajectory toward that book, I think. Anyway, the thing that I found interesting is that Harris, there's this sharp divide between subconscious and conscious, but he is capable of getting to a point where he can control himself through meditation to just observe his own thoughts as they occur, and they just happen naturally, and they just float by, and they're just clouds of thoughts. But where are you in that? You're observing it, you're conscious of it, you're able to relay it later. It's really fuzzy, and it's a near impossible argument to tangle with. But in my big argument against it, to some extent, I know I've told you this before, but I thought for the sake of the podcast I could bring it up again.
No, you should, because I remembered this as I was reading it, and I was going to say something about it.
Oh, good. So yeah, is the kind of analogy of imagining an operator switchboard and one of those old school operators that had to put in the plugs so people could talk to each other. And the idea of that switchboard being unbelievably gigantic, but the person's still somehow able to reach all these. It's a metaphor, right? So the pattern in which the calls that are coming in lights up is so complex that the conscious mind is incapable of noticing the fact that there's a deterministic pattern there. It just keeps repeating. But the pattern is long and unfathomably complex because there's so many variables. So the conscious mind, being incapable of grasping the larger pattern, has a kind of freedom in its ineptitude, where it just reacts to what's happening and forgets to some extent, and also maybe blissfully or mercifully forgets the exact sequence, or is incapable of retaining that information, and in being incapable of it, reacts differently each time to the exact same deterministic pattern. So then you have a kind of freedom in that.
The freedom of ineptitude.
Yes. Yes.
You have coined a phrase, my friend. Yeah, I can see that. It's a complicated way to think about it, but this is a complicated subject.
Yeah.
When I was thinking about you and that argument, I was thinking about how I could undermine this argument as well. Mm-hmm. On one point. So the 7 seconds you were referring to, so he was saying this experimental result you can actually anticipate the knowledge of a conscious movement up to 7 seconds. And what he actually says is that you can predict with 80% accuracy that something's going to take place as long as 7 seconds before the person knows it's going to take place. Mm-hmm. So if you just take that one piece of information, that one little story, I think it's a perfect way to explain that would be that your unconscious, your subconscious mind is always like got the it's always got some go-to moves that you're going to make. One of them is this, right, that we're going to measure, and your decision to actually operate on that is made consciously, based on input from 7 seconds before in your subconscious, unconscious mind, right? And the fact that your conscious mind regularly responds to information in the same way, right? 80% of the time actually acts on whatever that signal was that you were unconscious of. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that there's no free will associated with it. It means that your conscious mind is selecting to do something. So I think that's similar to what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, damn it, I wanted to book to like that I could point to and like make a compelling argument that we don't have free will, and he just didn't deliver it.
No, he didn't. But with subconscious reactivity or whatever, or learned subconscious reactivity, having been a musician all my life, I can play through stuff that there is no way, and especially improvising, that I am consciously thinking of my note choices. It's happening way too freaking fast. And it's kind of when you watch professional tennis and you see somebody like Federer playing Nadal or whatever, and that ball is moving fast enough that it would probably knock you out if it hit you in the jaw. It's just lightning fast, and their reactions are based more out of continual rehearsal of situations that are similar to what they're experiencing than conscious orientation. I mean, that's why you practice anything over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And you eventually reach a kind of lucidity of expression that comes up from these subconsciously stored, learned patterns. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's well explained. I mean, you'd say language is like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Pretty much everything is, really.
And musicians often say they'll be talking maybe about songwriting is a good example, where they'll say, I wrote a song in 2 minutes and it just came to me, and I'm sure you would say the same thing about something like at times it feels like something's just coming. You're just the instrument it's coming through, right? It's coming from somewhere else. So that's where it gets tricky. You're talking about the agency. Is it actually you? Because you're like, if you're not conscious of it, does that mean it's not you? Or if it does come through you as an instrument, does that mean it has to be coming from elsewhere?
Right.
Or does it just feel like that?
I think it just feels like that. And I think that's a great way of exemplifying the give and take nature between conscious and subconscious. Because the conscious mind has spent, 10,000 hours or whatever Malcolm Gladwell says you need to do to be a badass, right? On teaching learned patterns essentially to the subconscious. And then the subconscious, when you're in that moment, which a lot of people refer to as flow, like in athletes, or when you just kind of go, and time seems different, and you feel like, for me in improvising especially, the greatest moments when I do feel kind of I'm out of the way. My conscious mind isn't like constantly in expectation and gratification mode. It just kind of flows. Writing, inspired sounding stuff too is kind of similar. So that is a great way to show there is a bridge between the two, of information going one way for learning and information coming back. So if things are sparked in the subconscious before the conscious is aware of it, that have been, those reactions having been stored to some degree in the subconscious by the conscious teaching the subconscious over time, then it's there's still, like, I still see a free will element in that, because what is it you chose to teach the subconscious?
Or yes. Did the chemicals in your brain suggest to your conscious mind that you needed to teach yourself how to play guitar to begin with?
Well, see, that's why the scale book was great, because once you get into like elements of complexity that are that unbelievably high a degree, I mean, it's impossible to think about, like all the different things that led to guitar. My mom wanted me to have something to do when I was 6, and I just happened to like it. But at the same time, you could say all of the different events that led up to that were what made it so that I just happened to like it. But that's a level of complexity that's absolutely unfathomable.
Or maybe just hard to imagine.
Yeah, well, maybe. You'd have to take every individual moment and look at them as a chain of events, but which is kind of like the fatalism argument in philosophy.
Right.
But
it's the one that I wanted. It's the one I want to make too.
Right.
And it's so out of fashion. Nobody even makes. It's so dismissed that nobody even makes the argument. But that's the one I actually believe.
Did you ever read Richard Taylor? He had a fatalism argument he came up with in the 60s about a naval battle.
No.
David Foster Wallace had a refutation of it, that it was his philosophy thesis in grad school. Man, I might still have the book someplace. I'd have to look it up, but we could revisit this argument to some extent and check that out. But
for sure,
it's
not an easy argument. I mean, it's and like I said at the beginning, I think it comes down to a matter of just belief.
Yeah, I do too.
I don't know that there's any. We'll look for science to try to solve it. The question, it seems quite unreasonable that this is a scientifically answerable question.
Yep. Yeah, I think so too. So. It's almost like what's that like? If I was to use an example from the other end of things, like the God of the Gaps argument. As science learns more, there's still these pockets where you can explain things. So people who have a religious nature will say, well, that's obviously God. And at first it was weather, and then now that doesn't work anymore, but like what are the complexities behind the systems that bring about the weather? Well, maybe that's, and you can just go on and on and on. And that's I guess the problem with actually trying to have an argument about these things is that they are, and this is another way to relate it to scale, fractal in nature. The more you zoom in on the coastline of your argument, the more you can say there are these increase of details to the point you don't have the resolution to really go any further in. And that's,
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
The other example from scale that I don't know how it relates to this exactly, but this idea of the ant colony.
Mm-hmm.
So the colony of ants is like an organism, and there's no decision maker ant,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're all programmed somehow. They come into existence with the knowledge of how to build their homes, and there are these incredibly complex structures, right, with tunnels everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and they're large, and but it's all of these ants as a colony that are getting the thing built, as if there's an intelligence to it that's outside of what they do.
Yeah, which is fascinating, isn't it? It's like all of the separate tasks have over time, and I guess via evolution, one way or another, developed into a static pattern of group functionality.
Yeah, like another example that he gave was when a group of ants wants to cross some water, they can actually make themselves into bridges.
Yeah.
Right. But the implication is that they don't even know that they want to cross the water, that they're just somehow programmed to bridge water.
Right. Oh, it's
mind blowing to me.
It is, because there's a whole and you got to wonder how this stuff hierarchically works itself out in amongst the ants. They're the ones who are underwater the whole time and die. Yeah, and they're the flotate, they're the raft, and how those poor bastards get picked, I don't know. I would not want to. I wouldn't want to be that ant.
They're predestined, Jason. It's
right,
predestiny.
Right. By the ant god. Do you remember? This is a tangent, but I remember just absolutely despising this book when I was in college. It was called Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
Oh, I like that
really?
book. I read it when I was younger. I was younger when I read it, but
I remember I wanted to write a refutation of it called Jonathan Livingston Cow. That was
where the cow would not learn to fly.
Right. The cow not interested in chewing its cud, philosophical in nature, wants to do its own thing, decides to learn
must be
banjo.
A cynical bastard. That book is heartwarming. It's endearing. How could you react to it like that?